You said be kind to everyone, forgiving them just like you have done. And what about the times I feel betrayed, and I can't turn the other cheek? Make me kind like you, and in time I could too, learn to forgive like you forgive me. Help my heart love you tenderly. Oh, you were kind to everyone, forgiving them. You never threw a stone. What about the times you were betrayed? What about when you hung upon a tree? Make me kind like you, and in time I could too, learn to forgive like you forgive me. Help my heart love them tenderly. Tenderly, oh tenderly, oh help me love the way you love me tenderly, oh tenderly, oh help me love the way you love, oh tenderly, oh tenderly, oh help me love the way you love me tenderly, oh tenderly, oh help me love the way you love. Make me kind like you, and in time I could too, learn to forgive like you forgive me. Help my heart love them tenderly. What kind of love is this? What kind of love is this? You love me first. What kind of love is this?
All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Thursday morning, September the 21st, 2023. So it is, the way I was raised, September 21st is the first day of fall. Technically, right? Isn't that the first day? But in recent years, I say the way I was raised, the way I was taught in school, it's the 21st of September, the 21st of December, the 21st of March, the 21st of June. Those are the seasons. And then suddenly it was the 22nd elsewhere. right? It says the 22nd in places, and it's not the 22nd because it can't be. It's the 21st because that's the way it's always been. See. Anyway, happy fall. Either happy last day of summer or first day of fall, whichever it is. And I figured it out this morning. Been a little bit frustrated with the our textedly service. So sometime recently, probably in the last month, they changed it where it assigned a toll-free number, and I had to somehow register that, but nothing was communicated. I looked in my emails, nothing's communicated. Anyway, so I've been sending out daily text reminders, and nobody's been getting them, which is frustrating because it's deleting that amount from our account. So anyway, but I'm working on that. So hopefully we'll be getting the text updates back in gear here soon. And so let's get started. We are going to be looking at this just a couple of verses in Philippians chapter 4. You know, we're now hitting the memory verses, right? The verses that we're all very familiar with. And yet none of those verses, while they are sort of staccato, kind of given as, there are times where at the end of a letter, Paul will kind of give these just general, hey, don't forget these things, you know. But they are still in context here. There is still a context to what he's saying. There's still his congregational, historical context. And so we're going to look at a couple of them, and I'm not rushing through, so we're looking at two very short verses. But what's the hurry, right? We'll just go through these couple of verses. But let's, again, back up to Philippians chapter 3, verse 17. Brothers and sisters, join in following my example, and notice those who walk according to the pattern you have in us, right? He's not saying do as I say, not as I do. He's saying, first of all, look at what we're demonstrating here, and join together in following this example as I follow Messiah. For many walk, I've often told you about them, and now I'm even weeping as I tell you, who are enemies of the cross. Their end is destruction. Their God is their belly, and their glory is in their shame. They set their minds on earthly things. For our citizenship is in heaven, or is of the heavens, is in the heavens. And from that reality, we eagerly await for the Savior, the Lord Yeshua the Messiah, who will transform this humble body of ours into the likeness of his glorious body through the power that enables him even to put all things in subjection to himself. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, whom I love and I long for, my joy and my crown, stand firm in the Lord in this way, my loved ones, right? Again, stand firm on the basis of all of this. Stand firm in this way. And again, we talked about in what way. Well, first of all, pointing backward, recognizing where you're as citizens of heaven, and now pointing forward to this very specific, in what way? For example, specifically Euodia and Syntyche, he says, I urge, please, he says, parakalo, please, Euodia, Syntyche, have the same mind in the Lord. It says to be in harmony in the Lord, but it says have the same mind in the Lord. Indeed, or yes, and I ask you, true companion. So again, he's speaking to someone who's helping with the leadership of that congregation, one who is kind of yoked together with Paul, is the language here where he says true companion, to help these women. They labored side by side with me in spreading the good news, together with Clement and also the rest and my fellow workers whose names are in the book of life. Like, work together, help them, like live this out. It moves to that which has a name. You know, we can leave a sermon or leave a teaching and then walk into real life where there are names and there's history and there's emotion tied to disagreements or whatever, and everything kind of goes out the window. So Paul takes everything that he said about have this same mind, which is in Messiah Yeshua, and he says to these women who are likely leaders within the congregation, he says, Have the same mind. So he continues, and again, this the saints at Philippi, this congregation in Philippi, they're feeling pressure, experiencing pressures, outward pressures. I mean, the end of chapter 1 talked about how there are those who are standing against them. They're standing side by side, but there are those who are in opposition to them. And then there's been this pressure from within. Whatever's happening between Syntyche and Euodia, people potentially pulling for their own way, and he says, hey, don't consider yourself first, but put others before yourselves. You're facing all this pressure from without, pressure from within, and none of that is somehow a reason or an excuse in the midst of the pressure for us to be now marked by the works of the flesh. We talked about this a couple days ago, how we will let ourselves off the hook. I was tired. I was really tired. Right? My flesh needed sleep. I was hungry. You don't like me when I'm hungry. When I'm hungry, and then I get grumpy. Because my flesh, it's ruling me. It's ruling me. What did it... You think Yeshua, the day he was crucified, literally the day, he didn't get any sleep that night. I mean, he was up. They were taking him from mock trial to mock trial. You think he was tired? But when they hurled their insults at him, he didn't retaliate, 1 Peter says. When he was in the desert and he was hungry, that's when the enemy came to tempt him. Hey, serve yourself. Turn the stones into bread. Use whatever power, use the power you have selfishly. No, that's not my life. Man doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. And yet our instinct is to go, oh, come on, I was tired. I was exhausted. Okay. But the pressures are not, I mean, it's like where Yeshua says, what big deal if you love those who love you? Yeah? Nothing's proven by that. I say love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. You do that, in Luke chapter 6, you'll be like your Father in heaven. So big deal if I'm joyful when the circumstances are joyful. Duh. Big deal when I'm really easy to get along with when everything's really easy. Where my real character is tested is when it's not easy. He says, basically, so in the midst of this, you're feeling the pressure from within, without, but you're called to live as citizens of heaven, not as enemies of the cross. Enemies of the cross are those who have those who don't have the mind of Messiah. Living selfishly is to be an enemy of the crucified life. In chapter 1, verse 27, he said, only live your lives, live your citizenship in a manner worthy of the gospel, of the good news of the Messiah. Right? To live pulling for my way is to live as an enemy of the cross, right? Again, these pressures, a mentor in my life would call these things that you didn't plan for. You know those moments when you go, I didn't know that was going to happen, and you don't respond to it well. He calls those pop quizzes. Yeah? Like pop quizzes are, they're tests you take that you prepare for, right? You know the test is coming. But what happens when you're not ready for the test? Then what you really know comes out. What you really are comes out. And so the pop quizzes, they reveal to us. Now Paul, in as we go into these memory verses in chapter 4 here, kind of has these successive commands to, in the midst of the crucified life, in the midst of the sufferings. Right? What did he say in chapter 1 again? Verse 29, he says, For to you was granted or given or graced for Messiah's sake, not only to trust in him, but also to suffer for his sake. This is a gift. Experiencing the same struggle you saw in me and you're now hearing in me. He's like, it's not something I'm not experiencing. I'm following him, follow me. You see this, you're experiencing what I've experienced. When this Philippian congregation was established, Paul was beaten. Paul and Silas were beaten, put in stocks and chains, and what did they do? I will praise the Lord. They began to worship the Lord. And the place shook, and they didn't run for their lives. They that night led the jailer and his family to the Lord. And who knows how many of the inmates are now part of this congregation. They were there, they saw. And Paul says, look, this is what I want to know. For Philippians 3, I want to know him. I want to know Messiah and the power of his resurrection, the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, so somehow I might attain the resurrection from the dead. In the midst of the sufferings, in the midst of the discomfort, in the midst of the obstacle, on the bad day, when people are jerks, do everything, Philippians 3:14 and 15, do everything without grumbling. Or chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. Did I put in 3 or 4? Change it to 2. Sorry. Do everything without grumbling or arguing. Sorry, I need to fix it here so that I know. So that you might be blameless and innocent, children of God in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation. Among them you shine as lights in the world. In the midst of the suffering, in the midst of the difficulty. When it's hard, live out the fruit of the Spirit. So he'll say here, rejoice always. He'll say, be gentle or forbearing. Be even. Don't be anxiety-ridden about anything, but in everything, bring it to the Lord. Right? Have the mind of Messiah. Keep looking to him. You know, last night I was putting together one of these pieces of furniture, that you assemble, kind of IKEA style pieces, and I'm really actually pretty good at these. I've become an expert at it through the years. But this one came with one of these drawers, a pull-out drawer that has the little metal pieces on the side, and it has you disassemble the metal things. And anyway, I get to the end, and I'm tired, and I'm putting it in the drawer. And the thing is not clicking. The thing is not working. And the thing's driving me crazy. I spent an hour trying to get that drawer in. I turned things around. I disassembled things. And I really was getting frustrated. Ugh! Now I'm by myself. There's no one, at that moment, kids are in bed. Rib's in the room. And I'm just, so she hears me. She's like, why don't you stop for a little bit and maybe come back to it later? I'm like, no, I gotta get this done, and I'm angry. And I thought in that moment, kind of thinking about even this passage, like, how would Yeshua approach this? Now, first of all, he was a carpenter, so he'd be better at this than me. But I thought about that. I thought, as he's a builder, a carpenter. See, I started to try to force this thing, and it started to make some of that pressed wood inside kind of crack a little bit. And I thought, man, yeah, when you try to press it, and you don't look, and you're not careful, you can do damage. You try to hurry things, try to press it, can do damage. And in that moment, I began to go, and I still have to finish it, which I'm not looking forward to, but I want to approach this with the mind of Messiah. I want to be able to, in the midst of this, look and say, okay, what would Yeshua do? Keep looking at him. What was his disposition? What was his, not just what he did on the outside, but what was the overflow of his life? When the pressure came, what squeezed out? Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. You see, what would he do? How would he be? I'm talking about something simple. But again, it's in those moments when I'm not expecting. I thought I was going to get this thing put together, get it out of the way, bada bing, bada boom. And then I get frustrated. What can happen when I get frustrated is if I'm trying to get this done. I think at one point I was a little short. Rivka actually had come out and I said, hey, can you fold that laundry or whatever? And she was like, she wanted to split it up. And I was like, no, just do it. I was real short with her. Well, look at all I'm doing. If I ask you to do something. In the midst of the difficulty, we're all in process. I confess it not because I'm okay with it. And not because I'm like, well, this is how it is. But because I press on. I want to become like Yeshua, not just to do what he would do, but to be how he would be. In the midst of suffering, we read Hebrews 12. It says, let's run with endurance the race set before us, verse 2. Fixing our eyes, focusing on Yeshua, the initiator and the perfecter, the completer of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and he has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. For the joy set before him, he endured, right? That joy brings a perspective. So Paul says, in the midst of everything you're facing, he says, verse 4, rejoice in the Lord always. Pantote, he says, is at all times, in all things, in all of it, he says, rejoice in the Lord. Again, I will say, rejoice. Right? This is not a new command. 10 times in this little bitty letter, this is the 7th and 8th time that Paul uses the word, speaks of joy or rejoicing. Right? Joy is the noun, rejoicing is the verb, but the same word. And he says, rejoice in the Lord. Now, look, have you ever been going through a painful, difficult time and you have some smiley Joe come up and say, come on, smile. Don't get down, rejoice. Be happy. And meanwhile, their lives are currently painless, struggle-free. They have no clue what you're going through. They don't realize. There are people, look, some of you have been in physical pain for as long as you can remember, and the compounding impact of that. They don't have any idea what you're going through. They don't realize what you faced, what you've endured, or emotionally what you've encountered. And so it's tough. It's tough to take that kind of, just take it seriously when people come with platitudes like that. It's like walk in my shoes for 5 minutes and come back with your pep talk. But Paul isn't a smiley Joe here who doesn't know. He comes to them with this level of credibility, right, when it comes to rejoicing. He's writing this from his own Roman imprisonment. But he says, but I'm rejoicing because, while some might actually think that this is stopping the spread of the gospel, actually, it's quite the opposite, he says in chapter 1. Right? And there are those, he says, who are opposing me, other believers, preaching out of their own selfish motives. But they're preaching Messiah, and it's in this that I rejoice, he says. Again, Paul, when he was in a Philippian jail, when he and Silas had been beaten and chained up, they were worshiping the Lord. They began to praise the Lord, singing praises to him. Like, he has credibility when he says rejoice in the Lord in all things. They've seen him do it. They're seeing him do it even now. He's saying, follow my example. Rejoice. Rejoice when? Rejoice when things are going well. Rejoice when the bank account is full and you feel comfortable because that's really where the security lies. Rejoice when all conflict is completely squelched. Rejoice only when my sickness or pain is completely gone. Rejoice when? He says, rejoice pantote, in all things, always, in every circumstance. Right? And it's not just a platitude for believers. He means it. He's serious about it, so he reiterates it. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. You're suffering at the hands of local citizens? Rejoice. Man, we're up in arms. We're up in arms. What do you see what they're taking away from us? Ah! Rejoice. But what does that mean, right? What does it mean to rejoice in the Lord? He says, rejoice in the Lord. Joy is a fruit of the Spirit. Does that mean that as the Spirit dwells within me, then the fruit of my life is that I'm always kind of walking around like, hey, y'all, giggling and happy and laughing? Like, no, I mean, the joy that is the fruit of the Spirit is not some giddiness. It's a joy that's rooted in perspective. That when all is said and when all is done, listen, knowing this, I know this, on the basis of this, that every knee will bow and every tongue will confess, that they will confess, and they will, the reality that is underpinning me and transforming me day by day, that Yeshua the Messiah is Lord, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. I can rejoice because what I just read in the end of chapter 3, He will transform this humble, broken body of mine into the likeness of His glorious body through the power that enables Him even to put all things in subjection to Himself. So I'm facing difficulties, or I'm under stress and I don't know what's coming, and circumstances of my life are frightening, and the fear of the unknown beginning to overwhelm. What do? It says, the next verse says the Lord is new. The following verse says don't be anxious. So look to Him, right? Fix your eyes on the one who you and I are apprenticing under. What was His disposition? How did He respond to persecution, to pain, to rejection, to suffering, to trials, to difficulties? It says, for the joy set before Him, He endured the cross, despising its shame. What did Yeshua tell us? Matthew chapter 5. When people revile you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely, on account of me, punch him in the mouth. No. Rejoice and be glad. For your reward in heaven is great. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets, in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. It says rejoice always. Rejoice not just in resurrection, but in suffering. It is a rejoicing that can be had pantote, in all things, always, because it's not dependent on the changing circumstances. It's dependent upon the one who doesn't change. And again, Paul repeats it with reference to the future. He goes, again, I'm going to tell you rejoice. It's as though he kind of anticipated some of the natural objections. How can we possibly rejoice given what's going on here? So he sensed the need to reiterate the command. Paul said, don't rush past this. Again, I say rejoice. It's a rejoicing not tied to circumstance. It's not rooted in a pay raise. It's not rooted in whatever is the condition of your romantic status with in your life. It's a joy that's tied to trust in the Lord, a state of well-being despite the circumstances, because every knee will bow, every tongue will confess. Verse 5, let your gentleness be known to all, be made known, let it be evident to all, the Lord is near, or the Lord is approaching. So, Paul has said in chapter 2, don't just look out for your own interest, but for the interest of others. And here he uses this word, let your gentleness be evident to all, be made known to all. This word gentleness, it's not typically the word you'll read as gentleness is a word that has to do with humility or meekness, a gentleness. But this word is, it's epiekis, it's from the word echo, which means to yield, to be reasonable. It's an expression for balanced and decent behavior. And what it came to be used of a considerate and thoughtful attitude in legal circumstances. So when there would be, you're dealing with justice and the laws and the claims, it was kind of this even. It was an attitude that stood in contrast to an attitude that demands one's own rights be upheld at all costs. Right? It's a word that would reflect an attitude of contentment with your status, even when you're being treated unjustly. And that fits with what Paul has been saying. So, in other words, Paul expects believers to be guided by a frame of mind that doesn't put priority on my rights, on personal rights. right? Believers whose primary concern is whether or not they're being dealt with fairly. If that's your focus, you're going to fail to exercise this fundamental frame of mind that says, I'm going to prefer others above myself. No, if all I'm concerned about is, well, wait a minute, what about me? I mean, isn't that our go-to? In the midst of conflict, the person will say, this is how I'm affected by this. And what's the response? Okay. But this is how I'm affected. Right? Rather than being there. Okay, this is how you're affected? Or this is what I'm going to put your preferences or I'm going to put you above me. That's a scary thing because they may not reciprocate. Right? So, but that's what we're called to be, you before me. Yeshua didn't love because he was loved first. He continued loving even when he wasn't loved back. So he's the one we're to be looking at. He says, let that gentleness or that the willingness to not prefer myself above others, let that attitude that doesn't require that everything work in my favor or about my right, be willing to lay that down. Boy, that's so unnatural. Especially, I mean, we can talk about it in terms of, especially in personal relationships. I'm not talking about just like, the stuff we deal with about in, the country about my rights and that's a whole nother, I mean, it's the same thing, but it's, I can be good about laying down those rights and still within that natural sense of, well, wait a minute, what about me? To not do that. So he said, the Lord is near, or the Lord is approaching, right? The one who demonstrated us, the one who personifies what this is near. And he's coming, right? That should awaken us to follow his example. One old commentator, J.B. Lightfoot, he paraphrases it this way. He says, to what purpose is this rivalry, this self-assertion? The end is near, when you will have to resign everything. Bear with others now, so that God may bear with you then. Like, why are you focused on all of this now? The end is near. The Lord is approaching. Don't be earthly minded. Set your mind on things above. Your citizenship is in heaven, not here. The way of the kingdom is your way. It's not me first. And so Paul he's demonstrating making this known in his own life, right? There are those, again, maligning him, speaking falsely. Whatever their motives, he didn't retaliate. He was rejoicing that they were preaching Yeshua. And that's not what my flesh wants to do. My flesh wants to fight back. My flesh wants to rise up and defend myself. My flesh wants to win, but I'm to crucify the flesh, right? Galatians 5:24. It says, now those who belong to Messiah have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live by the Spirit, let us also walk by the Spirit. Let's not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. Look at Yeshua. Our job is not to sling mud back at those who slung mud at first. Well, they did first. We wipe off the mud. And we don't let it get into our hearts. We are of a different kingdom. We're of a different spirit. We're to be responding with the fruit of the Spirit. Let your gentleness be evident to all the Lord is near. That means in private when no one's looking, right? Let your gentleness be evident. Because whatever is done, the issue is the condition of your heart. So when others are around, ultimately there'll be moments where the disposition of the heart will overflow in those moments of in those pop quizzes. So you become frustrated, you feel mistreated, misunderstood, slandered or challenged, lied about. Well, all those things happened to Yeshua. How did he respond? Did he engage and challenge back? Did he reply to the lies with self-defense? Did he strike back? What was his disposition? Right? For the joy set before him, he endured. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I tell you, rejoice. Keep your mind set on him. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. He's near. Look at him. He's right here. He's right here. Lord, help me put this piece of furniture together. Quiet my heart. Teach me in the midst of this. Don't let this become something that controls me. Let it be an opportunity for you to form me. Right? He's near, so rejoice. He's near, so be content in the midst of the circumstances that even feel unfair. He's near. Do not be anxious, then we'll talk tomorrow about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving present your request to God. And the peace of God which transcends, which is beyond understanding, transcends your intellect, will guard your heart and your mind in Messiah Yeshua. I want to close reading Psalm 145:17 and through 19. Adonai is righteous in all his ways and kind in all his deeds. Adonai is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. He will fulfill the desire of those who fear him. He will hear their cry and save them. He is near. So, what's the overflow of that nearness? Of the recognition of that nearness? What's the overflow in your relationships, in your work relationships, in the way that we treat our enemies? What's the overflow? Let your gentleness be evident to all. He's near. Amen? All right. Well, let me say good morning to everybody. Good morning to the Eddies, to Lauren and Mike and David and Levi and Valor and Haven. And good morning to Everett, and good afternoon to Tina Fowler, and good afternoon to my sister Maria. I love you, sis. And hello to Eileen and to Jerry and Janet and Dayspring and Rachel. Let's see here. Good morning to Barbara Callahan and to Barbara Eaker. And good morning to Pastor and Sister Martinez. And hold on, my internet here is slow. Good morning to Kathleen and to Kelly and Melody Woods and to Kelly Kenfield and to Richard and Ellen. And good morning to Pat and Lori and to Ron and Amy and Sonia and Margarita and Sonia Takach, to Joshua and to Joyce and to Joe and Jeannie and Sharon and to Misty, and I think and to the Oaks, and good morning as well. All right. Well, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a beautiful day.
You said be kind to everyone, forgiving them just like you have done. And what about the times I feel betrayed and I can't turn the other cheek? Make me kind like you, and in time I could learn to forgive like you forgive me. Help my heart love tenderly. Oh, you were kind to everyone, forgiving them. You never threw a stone. What about the times you